Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
My name is Osman Siddique. I'm the president of National Interest Foundation. I'd like to thank you all for being with us today. It's great. I understand the difficulties of getting here to Capitol Hill, the traffic. Thank you that I'm not used to this traffic. Jim Moran can tell you about it. And it's getting worse. So thank you for being with us. I'm honored to welcome you here and to have our distinguished speakers. We'll be having 3 panels today to speak about human rights and U.S. foreign policy. And now foreign policy for the United States. It's the major power in the world. Frequently, we make some huge mistakes. We deal with dictators and killers, and sometimes we actually promote them. In the 70s and 80s, the U.S. played a role in organizing coup against democratically elected governments in Chile. America still paid the price for the coup against Mossadegh in Iran in the 50s. And what we have in Iran now is a result of what the CIA did in Iran in the 50s, because they didn't allow or respect democracy or the choice of the people of Iran. Now we have a government of Iran that can deal with it. So, in reality, it's a short-term benefits that the U.S. gets when they support dictators, because they end up losing the people. So it's much better for the U.S. to invest in the people around the world than investing in dictatorships. If you look at the political map, you see many dictators are actually our best friends. We will have 3 panels, and like to just instruct our attendees that each speaker will speak for 10 to 12 minutes, and they will have Q&A. So we ask questions, please be short, do not give a lecture, and just ask your questions so you give the chance to other people to ask more questions. One of them, just like to be honest with everybody without naming, a member of Congress apologized last time for appearing today because he said I tweeted a criticism of Netanyahu, which I think most American Jews criticize Netanyahu, and many Israelis, actually thousands, but they're setting against him. So this is the political situation. Congress is on session. There were lots of hearings, so many members of Congress either not apologize because of the hearings, or they'll be coming in and out from their hearings to speak, so they will not stick to this time. They'll probably come at 11 or 12. So having said that, I would like to introduce the moderator, Ambassador Osman Siddique. Osman is a dear friend, and he's an accomplished entrepreneur businessman. He used to own the 4th largest travel agency in the country. And then he became the first ever U.S. ambassador of Muslim faith. He was appointed by President Clinton to Fiji and the islands in the South Pacific. Introduced by your friend Osman Siddique, and it's an old look.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Khaled, for your most gracious introduction. Before I continue, let me tell you I'm a recovering laryngitis patient, and I will be as succinct and as clear as possible. So if you guys feel that you didn't hear or understand what I say, please feel free to ask. Anyway, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this great session that Khaled Safaria International Foundation has organized. It is great to be moderating a panel as distinguished as this. As Khaled said, a couple of them are on their way because they're committee meetings, but I have the distinct honor to introduce an old friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Congressman Gerry Connolly, and Bruce Fein, and Jim Moran. But before I do that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make a very brief remark about this topic, which is so close to my heart. The protection of fundamental human rights was a foundation stone in the establishment of the United States over 200 years ago. Since then, a central goal of U.S. foreign policy has been the promotion of respect for human rights as embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Supporting human rights not only promotes such fundamental American values as religious freedom and workers' rights, but also helps create a more secure, stable, and prosperous global arena in which the United States can advance its national interest. In addition, democracy is the one national interest that helps to secure all the others. Democratically governed nations are more likely to secure the peace, deter aggression, expand open markets, promote economic development, protect American citizens, combat international terrorism and crime, uphold human and workers' rights, avoid humanitarian crisis and refugee flows, improve the global environment, and protect human health. The United States uses a wide range of tools to advance a freedom agenda, including bilateral democracy, multilateral engagement, foreign assistance, reporting and public outrage, and economic sanctions. The Department of State works with democratic partners, international and regional organizations, non-governmental organizations, and engaged citizens to support those seeking freedom. The United States has the power and resources to create a positive change for human rights beyond its borders. The global defense of human rights is stronger when the United States joins with others to promote and protect them. Ladies and gentlemen, although the US policymakers often espouse human rights and humanitarian values, the United States has been inconsistent in defending human rights abroad. The US government has often invoked human rights selectively or to achieve a short-term diplomatic goal. Instead, foreign policy makers should commit in word and deed to a foreign policy that consistently prioritizes promoting and protecting human rights, not solely for them. As the United States grapples with systematic racism and other human rights violations domestically, it is particularly important for our government to ensure that US foreign policy helps to eliminate and does not contribute to discrimination around the world and strengthens equality in law practice. Before I end, let me conclude with a few things that I hope we can carry back. What the United States is known and appreciated for around the world is not just its strong economy and military capability. It is its democratic way of life and commitment to the observance of human rights. Our nation defines itself by the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the ending of slavery and segregation, the promotion of equal rights for women, the struggle to end racial and minority discrimination, and the defense of free speech, press, and civil liberties. In its dealing with foreign governments and countries, it must necessarily reflect this identity. Whether it is well expressed will depend on the nature and strength of its human rights policy and the dedication and skill of its diplomatic corps in the implementation of this policy. Thank you, and I would now like to open this discussion by introducing our panel members. First, I'd like to start with the Congressman Gerry Connolly. And Mr. Connolly, I do have your bio. Do you want me to read it a little bit?
Oh, let's get my whole thing.
It's got a couple hours. Mr. Basseri, thank you so much. And thank you for your thoughtful remarks in this service. And I want to thank my friend Khaled Sapuri for inviting me here today. What a shame that a member of Congress who is invited to talk about human rights, including freedom of expression, decides to punish somebody for freedom of expression. Maybe that's the times we live in, but it's a contradictory message. I reserve the right to criticize foreign leaders, including Mr. Netanyahu, and have done so. And I'm here. Human rights. Abraham Lincoln's favorite and often cited, most cited document in the American compendium was the Declaration of Independence. And he cited time and again the freedoms enumerated in Thomas Jefferson's draft. That all men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson knew that. Maybe by DNA we are, not by social status we aren't. But it was an aspirational goal. And then he said, endowed by certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, in the 18th century mind, life and liberty, okay, can figure that out. We're not like committed to the liberty part, but we get it. Kind of an enlightenment idea. But the pursuit of happiness, that was an extraordinary idea. What is that? That's too amorphous. It's undefined. It could be interpreted as all-inclusive. And we know over time that that meant freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom to think what you want to think, freedom to participate, to dissent, to vote, to be heard or not. And freedom from that knock on the door in the middle of the night by police forces because you said or did something unacceptable to the ruling power. And something the United States has done since that declaration is to universalize it. We have asserted that those are not qualities or rights unique to our culture. They are universal human aspirations to which everyone on the planet is entitled. Eleanor Roosevelt helped shepherd the writing of the Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations shortly after it was formed. And she saw to it that that statement was bought into by the world community at that time. It's taken on more importance ever since. The struggle for human rights is ongoing. And we see progression and regression all over the world. Human rights can't just be a slogan. It has to be internalized, and sometimes that's painful. Many of us come from cultures that are not tolerant of the other. But to be an American is to embrace that tolerance. Embrace it. Not accept it. Embrace it. And that means that we enter into a pluralistic society where Muslims and Jews and Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and atheists live side by side. And they have every right to do so without persecution. That does not mean we live in a society without serious flaws and sometimes even violent expressions of opposition to that tolerance, to that embrace. But if we want peace in the world, human rights is the centerpiece, without which there is no peace. Khalid Safori introduced me to an constituent of mine named Jamal Khashoggi. We had dinner a few months before he died. I have a picture of the two of us sitting and talking. Why did he die? Because he dared to print opinions mildly critical of the Saudi government. And for that, the Saudi crown prince organized an assassination squad, lured him into the consulate, Saudi consulate in Istanbul, killed him and dismembered him. They had no respect for human rights. And they show little respect today in cracking down on dissidents and cracking down on women who dare to express their desire
for equal participation in their society. There's a war going on as we speak in Ukraine. What is the Ukraine guilty of? It is guilty, in the Russian eyes, of daring to assert their own rights. Their right to self-determination. Their right to decide with whom they wish to associate. Their right to move west rather than east. Their right to have their own identity as a people. And for that, Russia has, in the most degrading, brutal, sordid fashion, invaded, occupied, annexed, murdered, tortured, brutalized, raped the Ukrainian people. The outcome of that struggle is important to all of us. All of us are stakeholders in that struggle. Because Ukraine prevailing in this struggle is a serious blow for human rights. It's a serious blow for those of us who believe in democratic values and assert that's the future of the human kind, not the authoritarian or autocratic opposition. If we're going to uplift human spirits, if we're going to allow humans to experience their full potential, human rights is the cornerstone. Without fear, to participate fully, express myself fully, worship fully if I choose, and to establish my identity and that of my family and that of my community. That ought to be a simple proposition. It is not as a controversial proposition, and has been since Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, asserted that all men, today would say, and women, have inalienable rights. So the struggle for those rights continues and always will in the human dialect. But that struggle is the most noble I can imagine. And it's the most important all of us should be engaged in. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for picking this topic for us to discuss. Stay well.
And thank you, Congressman, for your very beautiful expose of what's going on. As we learned a lot, and I can see why you don't need an introduction. The next speaker is a very distinguished lawyer, a public servant, and a scholar. His name is Bruce Fein, and with your permission, Mr. Fein, I would like to introduce you. Because a lot of us know you, few of you may not, and for that reason, I'm going to take the liberty of introducing Bruce Fein.
If that's me, interject that. He's not speaking under oath.
Bruce Fein is a nationally and internationally renowned constitutional lawyer, scholar, and a writer. After graduating with honors from Harvard Law School in 1972, Fein checked under District Judge Frank Kaufman. He then served as Special Assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel in the U.S. Department of Justice. Fein has also served as the Assistant Director of the Office of Policy Planning, the Special Assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, and Associate Deputy Attorney General under President Ronald Reagan. He was then appointed as General Counsel to the Federal Communications Commission under Chairman Martin Fowler. In 1987, Fein left government work to practice private law, where he also wrote weekly columns for Washington Times. During this time, he assisted Congressman Bob Clark in drafting articles of impeachment against President Bill Clinton for perjury and obstruction of justice. He then went on to serve on the American Bar Association's task force on presidential signing statements and represented Edward Snowden's father. Bruce Fein also authored a book titled American Empire Before the Fall, which was published in 2010. Currently, Bruce Fein serves as the president and founder of the law firm Bruce Fein and Associates Incorporated. He makes regular appearances on national television and radio, including MSNBC, Fox, C-SPAN, BBC, Reuters, and NPR. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bruce Fein.
Thank you. We see I was accurate. He didn't speak under COVID. And I want to like the Congressman Connolly for its courage and great with more truth. Is this now the mic is on? Before I get earthbound, I do want to underscore that I'm a thorough believer in the idea that a life disengaged from justice is not worth living. So our aspirations are always money to exceed rest. But I think we need to understand the magnitude of issue or confront with regard to having distinct human rights, supersede national interest, law power, as strongly do what they can, they link stuff with the must. It's been the iron over the universe for centuries. And I want to go back and just comment even on our own Declaration of Independence, which has fabulous aspirations. But at the time it was issued, we still had slavery in the United States. The Declaration did not disturb sight. Women were disenfranchised. Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, said, wait, don't leave the ladies out. Every husband would be a tyrant to quit, but the ladies were left out. The Women's Franchise Amendment wasn't until 1920. It was a long struggle, including a civil war. And with regard to the ideas that because we have aspirations, it's cost-free to try to go abroad and land them elsewhere. What comes to mind is John Stadens and Secretary of State in 1821 and July 4th address to Congress. He said, although we wish freedom and independence well everywhere, we don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Not because they're not monsters to destroy, but because it said that act of limitless executive power, which is what war is about, would destroy our own values at home, would come back and destroy ourselves as a culture. So that our influence abroad should be the influence of example, perfect things at home, wish things well abroad, but recognize once you cross the Rubicon to war, which is, to be candid, the legalization of first-degree murder. You can kill people who are not threatening you, right? That's a pretty grim understanding of what war really is. It's like William Tecumseh's sermon said, war is hell, as it did as hell. So if you look at the United States historically, human rights, not episodic, but consistent, have been subordinated to national interests. At the Paris Peace Conference, the Japanese wanted the non-discrimination clause put in there that each country which signatory could not practice racial discrimination. And Woodrow Wilson said, no way, that's not going to fly in the United States. We fought with segregated armed forces. And given the discrimination against the Japanese at that time, there's no way that that treaty would have had a chance. It didn't get passed anyway. And I'll take a moment here to intro the performance by my colleague here, Jim, where I was attending a hearing that I don't know any chairman at the time on the Uyghurs being detained in Guantanamo Bay. And Jim was asking how come they wouldn't give him any authority to go down and speak to the Uyghurs. Because how do you do these? The Uyghurs were the enemies of the Chinese Communists. Why are we detaining them? And he said, well, this is at a time that the United States was creating a Chinese security force of the continent interrogate to lead with, but not Jim, because he was an outside disinterested observer. And why are they there? Well, in 2002, then Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage went to the Chinese and said, listen, we do not want you to veto an Iraqi war resolution that gives us cover to go in and invade in 2003. Give us cover to commit a crime of aggression. That's the Saddam Hussein's threatening to attack the United States. But if you will withhold your veto, we'll list the Uyghurs as a terrorist organization called ETIM. We struck the deal. China did not veto the resolution. We went into Iraq and then committed more war crimes in Iraq. And that's where we put human rights on scale of our national interests. Then I want to raise another issue that's still resonant today. Maybe people think it's severe as it relates to World War II and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Dar Al-Farowitz wrote a book several years ago. It's 1,000 pages long. Any document would beyond a reasonable doubt. Every single military leader, including Eisenhower and Admiral Ley, say, you don't need the bombs. That chapter could ban surrender. All you got to do is say the emperor can have a titular role. That's all we got to do. They're ready to surrender. Russia hadn't reaffirmed the neutrality agreement. They were totally destroyed. They couldn't have access to any of their ports. 100% of the military leaders told Truman, you don't need to. Even the diplomats were consensus on that score, including Henry Stimson, Secretary of State. The one in the center was Jimmy Burns, and was a racist, later to governor of South Carolina, and Harry Truman. And so they dropped the bombs. Hiroshima and Nagasaki incinerated hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. It was Admiral Lay said, if we do that, that's a return to the Dark Ages. You don't win wars by killing innocent men, women, and children. And then Japan surrendered. We said, okay, now you can keep the emperor as a titular right. We said, what do we get? We're then prosecuting as a war. The same terms that were offered, that if we offered beforehand, would have foreclosed the dropping of the bombs. Now, those were probably the worst war crimes ever. We have an international tribunal of war crimes in the Far East. You think that we're prosecuting ourselves? No. No one goes anywhere. And today, the myth continues, oh, we saved 2-3 million American lives. We had to invade the mainland of Japan. We didn't drop the bombs. No. We would have saved all those lives simply saying what we said before. I mean, after we dropped the bombs, before. The emperor can have a titular role. That's all. If you look at the United States foreign policy in general, human rights are the caboose, small caboose, and national interests are the locomotive. The Jamal Khashoggi is just one instance of that. We blink all the time. There are military coups that happen in Tunisia. David Radwan is going to explain that, Masroui, in Egypt. And we say, well, it wasn't a military coup, because military coup triggers the curtailment of all the humanitarian aid. Well, why was it a military coup? Well, because we said it was, even though the human rights violations are terrible. In Tunisia today, you read a column by, I think, Nadia Marzouk, whose father was there, 2011 Arab Spring. He was arrested and detained, and she's just flabbergasted that the United States is doing nothing. We say, well, we have concerns, that everyone's being arrested. We have concerns. The president is calling black Africans. People are going to contaminate the race. It sounds like the semi-version of Adolf Hitler. Concerns about it. You have to be a little bit more than that. If you really are wanted to defend human rights. Then we can go back into World War II. The very infamous case of the SS St. Louis, coming with Jews from Germany, fleeing Giffords gas ovens. And we told them, no, sorry, you can't stop here. Hundreds, thousands went back and got incinerated. Because, at that time, anti-Semitism still was very, very strong in the United States. It wasn't just the government. If you went in the Ivy League colleges, if you wanted to be you or two, no way. Those were the initial quotas to keep the membership of Jews down, because they were viewed as an inferior species, if you will. So where are we now with regard to human rights? I think we need to accept that the subordination of human rights to national security interests is the rule, not the exception. We have to accept that we can never fail to try to get them reversed. I think it's a hideous idea. I do think that if we actually honored our precepts here, we would have influence abroad. I remember in the 1980s, I believe, there was something in China, I think it was Democracy Wall in Beijing. It's all filled with Thomas Jefferson Declaration of Independence. At that time, we weren't threatening China with 80,000 sanctions, selling weapons to Taiwan and everything else. But they wanted to emulate the United States on their own, because it's natural that people are born wanting to be free. I don't think you have to inculcate that. People don't like to be ruled by tyrants, so they can be intimidated and coerced into that position. But naturally, that is not their tendency. And insofar as we need to take care of ourselves here, where we are confronting daily our violations of our own Constitution. Presidents go to war on their own. They spy on us without any warrants on their own. It's known. He's the one that actually wrote change in the law that didn't enable the NSA to spy on everybody without any warrants whatsoever. Fourth Amendment is zero these days. We don't enforce the papal execution laws provision. The treaties go as executive agreements. Statutes go as executive orders. And it's surely true that, I mean, the idea that, and if you point out with the Congressman Sink today, that you speak up and, hey, we don't have any censorship out there, forget it. You know, there's certain taboo things that you can't say. And some of it true, it is necessary to direct government censorship, or sometimes it comes in, like Ron DeSantis in Florida. Disney opposes his law saying, hey, can't teach anything about LGBT. Suddenly they lose all their tax benefits and privileges down there. That is a retaliation and attempt at censorship for advertising correctly. But oftentimes, too, the culture itself. I could not speak to an ordinary group in the United States, especially veterans, that say, you know what, atomic bombs didn't save their life. We killed these people gratuitously to send a message to Russia. Stay out of China, stay out of Europe.
This is very inside, but if to
I apologize for overstating my will.
No problem.
But I just wanted to urge everybody here to be applauded. Every minute we devote to human rights and justice is a minute you'll never regret. Thank you.
Well, I think this wonderful summary of what's going on. He's a scholar, you can see, and he has a wide depth of knowledge in this subject. Anybody has any questions later on, just talk to Bruce. Now it is my extreme privilege to introduce a dear friend of mine, the Honorable Jim Moran. I've known him for many years, and I'd like to make a brief introduction to his resume, although he's very modest about it. He gave me a brief one. It's in small print, so I'm going to put my glasses on.
It's okay, it can be briefer than brief.
Jim Moran began his career in the Comptroller's Office of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. He went on to become Senior Specialist in Budgetary and Fiscal Policy for the Library of Congress, from where he became a professional staff member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He led the Senate staff in 1979 to pursue a political career. He was first elected to the Alexandria, Virginia City Council. He was later elected as Deputy Mayor of Alexandria in 1982 and Mayor in 1985. After serving as Mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, he was elected to the U.S. Congress in 1990. During his congressional career, he was a member of the Budget, Finance, Foreign Affairs, and Appropriations Committee. In his 22 years on appropriation, he was a member of the Defense, Interior, Health and Human Services, Veteran Affairs, Military, and goes on. After 24 years of public service, Moran decided not to seek re-election in 2014. In 2015, Moran joined a law firm, McDermott, Will & Emery. He now heads his own practice, Moran Global Strategies. Thank you, and I yield it to you, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. First of all, I know my colleague and good friend, Congressman Connolly, has gone to another hearing this take place, and they've done an NPC that people are staring at, wondering when he's going to get back to the hearing. But I want to say a word to begin this, and I think it's relevant to the topic at hand. First of all, I think we all know what happened just this week, where two terrific young people who wanted to serve their community and their congressman were hit by a baseball bat. No way it could have been stopped as far as we can see, but it's traumatic, and they're not going to get over that. I know Gerry's district office, and they act like a family, and this family was invaded in the South. A lot of people want to just take the next 2 days off because we know that Gerry cares about stuff like this very deeply. Like he's at his job, and being on this panel, I could tell you he's going to get some flack, some pushback, some criticism. Because some people are going to suggest that these folks are being critical of America, and I'd like to be critical of some of America's allies, and so they, it would have been easier for Gerry to just ignore this going, frankly. He had lots of excuses. But he cares about human rights, years ago what this is about, speaking out and the courage of your convictions, and standing up for what's right. I just want to set that context. And I'm going to say something until I'm going to give Gerry an opportunity to leave for the hearing, if you would like. And we're going to give him some applause as he gets out there. See, we're going to be careful.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you.
Ladies. Yes, sir. So, Bruce will address what some people are going to suggest is that this bill was an opportunity to be critical to tear down America's foreign policy, this great country of ours. It's just the opposite. America is defined by discussions like this because as individuals, we have the same dynamic that nations do. We only grow by learning from our mistakes. We're all fallible. We're all going to make mistakes, some more than others. And the critical test of who we are as an individual and as a nation is, are we willing to acknowledge those mistakes, and are we willing to learn from them and be better because of them? Now, this country has been blessed, thank you, sir. Close, right. But this country was blessed. We've got two benign neighbors to the north and south. We've got big oceans to the east and west. We've got bountiful natural resources. And because we were started at the time of the Enlightenment, we had a few people who had read from what was going on in France and so on. They write this Bill of Rights and this Constitution that empower individuals, that made this country distinct from other countries, that where power starts at the bottom with individuals, collectively, and then the top answers to the individuals instead of the other way around, which is the case in every other. And then we opened up borders to everyone who wanted to come here. And who wanted to come here? People who wanted to be able to practice their own religion and be safe in doing it. People who had different political viewpoints, people from different ethnicities, races, you name it. We attracted diversity from all over the world. You go to the rotunda in the Capitol and you see the frescoes around, and there's an emphasis upon inventions. Why inventions? Well, because America was the first country that let you get credit and profit from your inventions. If you invented something anyplace else, the ruler of that country kept it. It was theirs. Sorry, thanks for inventing it, but they took possession of it, not in the United States. And so we have prospered, we've thrived. We have been the beneficiaries of an extraordinary, terrific storm of positive things that created who we are today. But with that wonderful beneficence, whatever it came to be the case, we're the beneficiaries. But with it comes a concomitant responsibility. We are responsible for taking advantage of this advantage that we have to spread it around the world, to empower other people. We define ourselves by human rights, individual rights. We define ourselves by speaking truth to power. We define ourselves by trying to move the arc of history toward justice for everybody. That is our defining characteristic as a country. And that's why this panel is so important. So it's critically important. It wouldn't have moved that art in the pursuit of justice if we identify where we've made mistakes, where we are currently doing the wrong thing, so that we can move forward, we can correct, we can do a mid-course correction and move in the right direction. A direction that is worthy of all those people who sacrificed to get us where we are today. So, what were some of the mistakes? You know, one that I'm going to mention about Ambassador Siddique is very much aware of, concerns the fact that of his native country. He's the first, not only was he the first Muslim, first Bangladeshi to be an ambassador. But back in the early 70s, Henry Kissinger allowed the Pakistani military to slaughter hundreds of thousands of Bengalis just because they wanted independence, and we turned our back. Why? Because Secretary Kissinger wanted the Pakistani government's help enabling President Nixon to go to China. Talk about expediency. Talk about sacrificing whatever it took for some political gain. Vietnam. One of 3 million people are still not accounted for. We didn't need to go into Vietnam. The Vietnam were most concerned about the Chinese. We didn't see the difference. We thought they were all communists. They were led by these right-wing, really fascist, Joe McCarthy, Dick Livett, they're allowed. Even Harry Truman makes such a terrible mistake in giving billions of dollars to France to maintain his colonial empire. And so our young people go over there, and 58,000 lose their lives. Where are we today? Vietnam wants to do everything to be a partner of ours. Ho Chi Minh sent letters saying, can we work with the West? We need independence from China. That's the threat to our existence. Horrible mistake Vietnam has. Certainly another mistake that we are still suffering the consequences of is domains that are out. Why did we go into a country that had nothing to do with 9/11? That didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and we had no proof they did, despite statements to the contrary. I know from personal experience that it was largely driven because some of the neocons in the Bush 43 administration thought it would be in Israel's interest. So we go in, 80% of American service people who were there were asked, why are you here? And they said, because we're getting them back for what they did to us on 9/11. Imagine. Horrible mistake. But what did it do? It was like sticking a fist into a hornet's nest. And those hornets are still buzzing around. We destabilized the Middle East, and now European countries that would have embraced Enlightenment values, they're becoming more right-wing because of all the refugees that are streaming into their countries to get out of the unsafe, unstable countries from which they have left. Syria in particular, but so many countries. They risk their lives to get north. And that largely happened because of Foreign Affairs Act. Bruce mentioned Iran. You know, we were afraid that Siddique was going to be a legitimately elected Democratic president. We didn't want that because we needed the control of the oil going to England and the United States. And so the CIA, at least tacitly, I think they'll care what it really is about. The Kermit knows this. Kermit loves it all, to be specific. I don't know if they know who Kermit was, but they, you know, we can oppose it. And look where we are now. But you go around the world to some of these decisions that have been made, and you have to accept responsibility for what the consequences were. I don't think they strengthened the United States at all. What they did was to undermine our credibility. And so now let me address a specific situation that continues to this day. And it's gotten worse. As much of American foreign policy has been Israeli-centered. That's just a reality. Much of our policy of the United Nations is Israeli-centric. We wind up vetoing human rights resolutions that under other circumstances we would be supporting. But because of that unshakable support, we don't use any leverage. We subsidize the economy and the politics of Israel. Billions of dollars have been for dozens of years now. And yet what we have is pretty much a fascist, racist regime now, led by Benjamin Netanyahu. So when you want to criticize Netanyahu, what you're doing is supporting American values and saying, we do not want to support a fascist regime. Now that's not being anti-Semitic. In fact, it's not being anti-Israel. It's being pro-American values. We have people now making policy that is brutally racist. And when we talk about Ukraine, and I was just there every morning we talk about Ukraine in the talk shows. And just yesterday morning, Richard Haas said, we cannot allow another country to take over land not within its borders by force. Well, what's happening in Palestine? That's exactly what's happening in Palestine. We're importing settlers, giving them land, taking land from people whose families that are living there. And in fact, exactly 75 years ago, we allowed the destruction of the homes, of the livelihoods, of the legacies of thousands and thousands of families, about 700,000 people, forced them out. We should not have been at least complicit in that, but it wouldn't have happened had we not, in fact, passively supported what happened. And now the consequences. The consequences are that we have an apartheid regime. That is not consistent with our values. We have to speak up. We have to do the right thing. Now, where do we turn? Get the right thing done. Well, and it was mentioned our civil rights struggles, and of course, in talking about American history, I neglected the fact that we actually took the land from the people who are living here when the European settlers came in a brutal fashion. But this is not the 18th, 17th century. This is, we'll talk about the 20th and particularly the 21st century now. You'd think we learned from that injustice. And we built our economy in the 19th century, at least the first half of it, on the backs of slaves. We have to acknowledge that. And in doing so, we need to reassert what we stand for. We don't stand for an apartheid society. We don't stand for a racist society. We stand for a society where everyone deserves equal justice, equal treatment under the law. Now, who was largely responsible for the end of segregation? Who sacrificed the most? Look at the history. The people who showed the most courage, in fact, were young Jewish men who were killed because they were standing up for what they believed in and went south. And many of them lost their lives. So this is not about any form of anti-Semitism. This is about standing up for the rights of all Americans and of the fact of all people all over the world. And I expect that what we now call the Jewish lobby, the Israeli lobby, is exactly where we're going to find ultimately the kind of support. Now, it's probably not going to be AIPAC, it's more likely going to be J Street than others. But we're seeing a change in attitude. Where we may find, just as Trump is probably the best thing that happened with the Democratic Party, I have to say, bail this out. It may be that Netanyahu has shown what happens if we don't stick to our values and insist on our allies acting consistently with our values. That's what it'll stand today. It's got an enormous agenda ahead of us. That's why this is such a relevant topic. Thank you.
Lot of eloquence and explanation. I was spellbound. Thank you very much, Jim, for your wonderful expose of Wesleyan. Now it is going to be question and answer time. Kindly keep your question as questions and not statements. And please do what? So fast. Yes, you can either write or ask, but if I may, with your permission, as moderator of this panel, I would like to ask the first question, and then I will invite anyone who's interested to talk. My first question to the panel is about the International Criminal Court, ICC, which was created to bring justice to the world's worst war criminals, i.e., Slobodan Milosevic, Charles Taylor, Omar al-Bashir, and now Vladimir Putin. They are responsible for crime such as genocide and war crime. The United States is not a member of the ICC. It is within the company of such great countries who are egregious violators of human rights, like China, Russia, India, and a few others. The US obviously has its own argument that it infringes on its sovereignty, and that's the reason they have not signed to the Rome Statute. So if you may kindly give a couple of sentences.
I question. Yeah, the ICC statute, I can underscore, is the fact the United States, if all nations are supposed to be equal, why is it that some nations that are involved with the ICC are not having their sovereignty compromised? Only the United States has sovereignty compromised. So it's totally hypocritical, and we're eager to send other people from other countries to be tried by the ICC, but the United States, no. When the prior chief prosecutor of the ICC began an investigation of war crimes of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, we went ballistic. Mountain Vesuvius erupted. Said, no way, we can't cooperate whatsoever. We're going to shut down, we're going to put her, I think, on list, like on the boat, like it's ski list who could travel to the United States to do any business transactions. Said, okay, now I'm going to withdraw the investigation. So it's just another example of the double standards that we utilize. Every other country sees the double standards, so we insist that we do not. Even in Ukraine, for example. What's the difference in terms of law of our invasion of Iraq in 2003, and Saddam was not threatening us, and Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022? Putin wasn't being threatened, neither were we. What's the difference in international law standing? If you look back at the principle of aggressive war that was established at Nuremberg by the International Military Tribunal in 1946. Aggressive war is defined as a war not fought in self-defense. Well, Iraq war wasn't self-defense. Where's the prosecution for aggressive war? Nowhere to be seen. But until we recognize and are honest with ourselves, I'm not saying we're worse than other countries. Maybe a little bit there. I wouldn't say we're not exaggerating on us better than God. But we're never going to correct that. We can't live in an and I come back to one of my favorite heroes. I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. William Lloyd Garrison was a Bostonian. He began the Liberator magazine in 1833, saying that slavery and the Constitution were covenants in hell. And he persisted. He was tarred and feathered, driven out of Boston. He was around when 1865 arrived. The anti-slavery amendment was finally ratified. He shut down the Liberator magazine. But he was there for 37 years. He was a lone voice for a long, long time, ostracized as much as you could be. And that's, I think, the only way that we can move forward. But he had to recognize that slavery was a covenant with him. We got to recognize, too, how bad we are with regard to ignoring international norms and then try to correct.
Thank you very much. I will take question from the floor. Is anybody going to give a microphone to that gentleman, please?
Thank you. I'm Rahim Gawala from Jazeera. A couple of questions, primarily but not exclusively, to Jim Moran. What's your understanding of the Biden administration's position on the issue of executive? I mean, on the one hand, they do support Palestinian refugees, also with money, but on the other hand, they would not say they are actually supportive of commemoration of the Mecca. And my second question, what happened between Kevin McCarthy and Sheila Twigg the other day? Is that a McCarthy problem? Is it a Republican Party problem? I know that you're a Democrat. Or is it the problem of the entire establishment here in Washington, D.C., including Democrats, obviously? Thank you.
First of all, I'm going to respond to the last point briefly. The fact that the U.S. is not a party to the ICC is inexcusable and the height of hypocrisy. There are several reasons. One is pressure from Israel over speaking of Palestinians, but another is that we created an extrajudicial location outside of Cuba, Guantanamo, so that we could torture people and violate U.S. law at will. And then there are many other instances where we committed war crimes, so we don't want to be accountable for it. And that's why we're not a party to the ICC. Now, in terms of the question that you asked on the record, first of all, a slavish support of Israel, no matter what they say for and do, is nonpartisan. Both parties are intimidating, both politically and in terms of the financial support in taking that kind of stance. You know, I find the fact that the Republican Party's lives, actually slavishly supportive of Donald Trump to be comparable, because they know what the right thing to do is. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to think about it because it's not in their interest to do so. But I don't absolve the Democrats or take a position. They go, and frankly, I think less tolerance when you have when President Netanyahu, came to Washington and refused to meet with President Obama. He addressed himself to the Congress because he had more support there. This, I can't speak for the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party knows what its values are. If they go, they shouldn't be a member of the party. And what is happening in Israel today is wholly and antithetical to the Democratic Party's values, but they're not going to speak up for a number of obvious and yet expedient reasons. And your first question on the Nakba, it's the same answer, frankly. It's a question with the leverage. And Palestinians have Israelis not. I think there needs to be far more organization, far more structure, far more deliberateness on the Palestinian and frankly the entire Muslim community in the United States. It has, in numbers, it's identical to the Jewish ethnicity. But it's a question of focus, and I don't think it has the type of leverage that it can and should. We are seeing some Islamic Americans run for office, and I think that's very encouraging. But this country is really there for the taking if you want to get involved politically. And that's what needs to happen. And then something like the Nakba, which happened 75 years ago, should be recognized. I started a Holocaust memorial in Alexandria. We recognize it every year. I think that's a good thing. But it's about man's inhumanity to mankind. It's not because identifying one ethnicity, although that ethnicity reasons we don't need to go into has been perpetually persecuted because they haven't had a home in it. But I think there are other horrific examples of mankind's inhumanity to mankind that also want them to be recognized. That's the only way we're going to stop them from continuing to recur.
And Bruce, what's your understanding of the Biden administration policy on the issue NAFTA? Is it clear to you? Is it ambiguous? How do you see it?
No, I think it's as Jim said, it's opaque because they don't want to take a stance. I want to feel that minimizes the fallout and it lessens the hypocrisy by just saying, oh, you just want to waffle and say nothing about it. It's a little bit like the assassination of Shereen Atkins. Well, okay, we have an investigation. We really don't know what's going on. We're not going to really ask the Israelis to do anything, but if we're doing something, please be nice an investigation. And so that's typically what happens. We just abstain if you don't really want to have show any principles. I think the Biden administration doesn't have principles. And before he was elected, Biden said MBS is a riot because he assassinated Khashoggi. Becomes president, goes over to Riyadh and said, oh, please, give us some oil and hey, you're wonderful. And I just think that's unfortunately what Biden is about. Remember, Joe Biden, despite his, he opposed the attack of Russia on Ukraine. He voted in favor of the Iraqi war in 2002, 2003. Did he see any inconsistency? No. I don't really think he has real principles other than he likes to cling to office like every other public.
Well, I'll say he's a hell of a lot better president than Donald Trump.
Standing by faith praise.
Well, yeah, but again, when we go learn from our mistakes, we need to be self-critical. I think you're exaggerating some of the failings of the president, Bruce. But I will say I wholly agree with you in terms of Shireen Abu Akleh, that assassination was cold-blooded murder, and we know it. And we're not going to say anything about it for obvious political reasons.
We are going to move on to the next question.
Hi, so I guess my question's for Congressman Moran.
Please introduce yourself.
Selena. Thank you for your statements. They're definitely very refreshing to hear. And so I guess regarding pro-Palestinian legislation, policy legislation defending human rights, a lot of times it doesn't even make it off the House floor. And when I ask Democratic legislators why they don't kind of support this legislation, it's been co-sponsored, a lot of the times the response comes down to you're afraid of being attacked by these pro-Israeli groups. And as someone who has been attacked by those groups, what's your advice to that?
I don't blame them. But I'll acknowledge there were times when some members in tough seats were going to vote their conscience. And I caught their hand and pulled the card out because I knew it would lose that member. And we did. One of them, who later ran for Senate, said, Jim, why am I here if I can't vote my conscience? I said, okay, do it. And they did it, and they lost. That's just the reality today. I think sometimes we do have to make expedient decisions, but people who are in safe seats need to stand up and speak out for what they know is right, and too often they don't. They need to protect those members that are willing to show more courage than they are. But there needs to be a collective response to injustice, and unfortunately, it's insufficient today, in my view.
Good morning, my name is Joey Woods. We have a plenty so much more insight and new knowledge. You mentioned, many countries, Iraq, Vietnam, Palestine, and
again, as a country, I was hoping that we would have some positive sides that says we learned from our mistakes, but Congressman Moran, the whole law of unintended consequences is coming to bear. But you explained what's happening in Iraq and how all of this stuff now is affecting Europe and the rest of the country, and how this, destabilizes everything. How do we learn from this? How do we, go about going forward so we don't repeat the same mistakes?
Well, I agree that much supposition. I think that there's a lot of truth to apply. Let me just give you another point of view. Vladimir Putin is the one who made the big mistake. He was afraid of NATO organizing around his border, so what happens? NATO becomes stronger. They become tighter. They are going to more encroach on the border with Russia. He's devastated his economy. I'm not sure he ever, frankly, recovers. He's running an international gas station right now, and that I don't know how long the gas is going to, oil is going to hold out. It'll be quite a while. But he's not going to go down in history as in the savior of Russia. To the contrary. And frankly, I think we had to stand up for Ukraine. I hate to see the loss of life, but I think the integrity of borders has to be maintained, because everything we do sends a message. And there are an awful lot of authoritarians out there who you want to hear a message, we're going to look the other way. That's why I can have problems with the treatment of this current dominant, particularly in Israel, because it sends messages. What we've done with allowing Assad to get back into the good graces of most, of our allies, basically in the Middle East, that sends a message, and it's such a wrong message. What we're doing with the Emirates and the Saudis in many ways, are sending the wrong message. The Emiratis are working with the Wagner Group. They're embedded in their military. They're money laundering Russian money. We have to. Well, I'm going to get carried away here, but we have to be more true to our principles, and I do think that President Biden would like to do the right things. I think a lot of his staff wants to see people out of trouble, just wants to see another 4 years and simply get elected, and so they recommend, and he apparently agrees to do the same things. That's to keep them out of trouble, and that's not necessarily the kind of leadership that I think he's capable of.
Thank you. That's the end. As long as that, like 7 minutes. I think that Congress is not holding the hearings like Fulbright being to force the executive branch to come forward and explain what's going on and why. I don't want to overstate what the Fulbright hearings accomplished, but I think it was substantial. If there isn't any talk,
Thank you.
and it led to the paper. Congress is sitting there and paper stand up, make speech about it. But where are the hearings? And there's no executive privilege and no state secrets. Tell us what's going on. It's our money that's over there to spend.
Point well taken. Next question.
A life disengaged from justice is not worth living, Bruce Fein. Speaking up for our Constitution doesn't make us anti-Semitic, but pro-America, Jim Moran. I reserve the right to criticize any foreign leader, including Bibi Netanyahu, Gerry Connolly. Our president, if you invest in dictators, you will lose people, Khalid Safouri. Protection of the fundamental human rights is what this country stands for. Ambassador Siddique. Where is or who draws the line between the national interest and the code of ethics derived from the US Constitution when it turns to dealing with foreign dictators in the Middle East? Example, Qais Said, Abdel Fattah Sisi, Nabi Berri, others. The question is from the Assembly gathering. Hey.
Thank you.
Is that a question?
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think in the United States, the Declaration of Independence says it all. The ultimate sovereignty is us. We the people are the first words of the United States Constitution. It's us. And that means lobbying Congress, speaking out, protesting with peaceful means, the opportunity to seek redress of grievances through petitions. That means you got to be awakened. It's not a part-time job. It takes a lot of struggle to overcome, years or decades or millennia of bigotry. Like the civil rights struggle. That was literally 100 years before we got rid of Jim Crow. The women's suffrage amendment was still like over 100 years. And that means we can't be just expedient, Jim. Okay, I need to vote today to stay in power. You need to have people say, you know what, even if my stance today yields nothing, it sets a precedent. Someone has to be the first time to say anything. The very first person to oppose slavery, we don't know who that is. Probably got killed. We don't know. Somebody had to be the first one who said slavery is evil. The first person who said women aren't chattel. We don't know who that woman is, right? We don't know. But somebody has to say, I don't care whether I get any credit for it at all. I'm going to do it because it's right. The 5,000 blacks who were lynched between Jim Crow and Barack Obama, they were the ones who set the stage for Barack Obama. Even though he gets all the kudos, the first black president of the United States, what about those 5,000 who died? We don't know who they are. So we need to make sure that we are willing to be part of that 5,000. We stand up, maybe we get no credit whatsoever, we may pay a price, but at least we did what was right.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other question at this point? Right.
Thank you so much for this panel and for our comments today. My name is Mohammed Lapori. I'm an independent filmmaker and a documentarian. So I'm an immigrant American citizen, a Palestinian American. I'm glad that you touched base on Shireen Abu was also a Palestinian American journalist. And I was fortunate last year to follow Shireen Abu extensively here to the Capitol, meeting congressmen and congresswomen and senators to seek justice for their Shireen. So as an American citizen, Shireen Abu, the Biden administration failed to seek justice for its own citizen. And regarding that she was doing, regardless that she was doing her job in a zone that Israel is actually, by the UN, is not supposed to be there. And then as a Palestinian American filmmaker and documentarian, how can I feel safe to pursue my job as a documentarian, as a filmmaker, and then knowing that the US, my country, is not always there to protect me, but what happened with Shireen?
The last two questions were somewhat rhetorical. You know the answer as well as we do, because there is no clear answer. If you have to stand up for what is right. I personally think you'd have to make some judgments. You know, if you've got a family that you're responsible for, if there are other issues that you make a greater difference on, if the vote is quixotic, where you know there's only going to be a usual 10 or 12 who we vote with, then you have to make some judgment calls. I used to believe differently. I used to be more of an idealist. I don't think I've lost any of my values or purpose in life, but I do know that things are not black and white, if you will. They're not binary choices. You have to make judgment calls. In terms of Shireen Abu Akleh, as I said, that was cold-blooded and perfect. We know it. We have evidence to that effect. And we know it. Get it right over the year. It was a sniper that deliberately killed her to send a message. And the message we sent by not acknowledging the fact that it was murder and not trying to make anybody accountable was the wrong message. She risked her life. She lost her life. I think, other people are going to have to continue to do so. But don't be Don Quixote. I loathe, to read about Don Quixote. It's inspiring. But the reality is that he accomplished very little. I want change. I think we have to be strategic. We have to organize. And the answer to both your questions, it is right here. We have to have panels like this. We have to support organizations like the National Interest Foundation. We have to show up. We have to speak out. We have to network, and we have to keep pushing. And I believe, because it'd be hopeless if I didn't believe, that, as Barack Obama would say, that the arc of history moves very slowly, but it does bend in the direction of justice. I believe that, but only if we have the courage of our convictions.
Thank you very much. This concludes our session. And the National Interest Foundation of Society for organizing this, and all the panelists, and all those who had some brilliant questions. And I apologize for those who couldn't ask because of time constraint. Thank you very much, and we're getting ready for the next panel discussion.